Vic Mullen, the grumpy old Scotsman. So, something interesting popped up on my newsfeed very early yesterday morning, but I already had yesterday's video planned, so I didn't cover it, so I thought I'd cover it today. Bill Gates. Yeah, we're not talking about Labour for a change. Bill Gates. So we all know who Bill Gates is, the former head honcho behind the Microsoft Corporation, the man responsible for Windows and Microsoft Office and all that Microsofty stuff that's going on. The guy's one of the richest men in the United States. I don't think he's even in the top 5, but he's somewhere in the top 10. He's somewhere in the top 10. Bill Gates became a philanthropist when he essentially left Microsoft and left the running of Microsoft to Steve Ballmer practically 20 years ago now. It's been that long, I know, practically 20 years ago now. Bill Gates went off to spend his money on charitable stuff, and it was like, good on you, Bill, you deserve the early retirement. Then Bill got involved in climate change. Now, we all know what Bill Gates was saying all the way through the early 2000s. All the way through it, just after he retired or left Microsoft's head position. Climate change is this generation's biggest threat. Direct quote from Bill Gates, somewhere around 2010. Climate change will wipe out the human race unless we do something about it. Bill Gates, round about 2015, 2016, during one of the COP summits. I think it was the COP summit in Helsinki, from what I remember. It was all over the news. Even as recent as 2023, Bill Gates was sitting down with an interview for, I think it was, who was it? I keep thinking it's not Joe Rogan. It's one of the it's not Joe Rogan, but it's one of the other big podcasters. I don't think Gates has ever been on the Rogan show, but it's one of the big podcasters at the end of 2023, going into 2024, I remember it very well, and Bill Gates categorically said climate change is the biggest oncoming human-made disaster that we have ever faced. Direct quote. And I know it because I looked it up in ChatGPT. I wanted quotes from Bill Gates about climate change and how bad he thinks climate change is. So we're all in agreement here that for the better part of 2 decades, 20 years, Bill Gates has been hammering in that climate change is bad, global warming is happening, the human race is going to be wiped out if we don't do something about it now. We're all going to die. Then something very interesting popped up on my newsfeed yesterday. And it's not just The Guardian that's reporting this. CNN's reporting it. The BBC's reporting it. A whole bunch of other news feeds are reporting it. If I bring... Oh, no, that's the video input. Vic, you fool. If I bring in this... From The Guardian, Bill Gates says climate crisis won't cause humanity's demise and call to shift focus to improving lives. But hold on, before I rant, let's read on here. Bill Gates has called for a strategic pivot in the effort against the climate crisis, writing that the world should shift away from trying to limit rising temperatures to instead focusing on efforts to prevent disease and poverty. Hold on a minute, Billy boy. Billy old boy. Old bean Billy. Hold on a minute, Bill. I thought you said less than 2 years ago that rising temperatures is humanity's biggest crisis and it could wipe out the entirety of humanity. That was 2 years ago, Bill. 2 years ago. All of a sudden, he just pivot. He just completely changes his mind. Climate scam. That's what climate change is, and I've always thought it's a big scam. Let's move on. Writing in his Gates Notes website, the billionaire Microsoft co-founder criticised what he described as a doomsday view of climate change. Whose fault is that, Billy old bean boy? Doomsday view. You were the one. You were one of the ones, Bill, saying climate change is going to wipe out humanity. Climate change is humanity's biggest disaster that's oncoming. Climate change is a big problem that we all need. You were one of the doomsday sayers. You were one of them, Bill. You cretin. Moving on. Gates' memo comes a day after the UN said humanity had missed its target of limiting global heating to 1.5 Celsius, with the UN Secretary-General warning of devastating consequences. And that's what Bill Gates has been saying for the past 20 years. And all of a sudden, Bill Gates changes his mind. The article goes on about Bill Gates investing in other charitable organisations. But here's the thing. Why the sudden pivot? Why? Why the sudden... Now, a lot of people look at Bill Gates and think, nah, it's Bill Gates. But the one thing we need to remember here is Bill Gates is the nerd's equivalent of the geek's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was able to look 2, 3, 4 steps ahead into the future. He was a geek. Bill Gates does the same, but he didn't dress like Steve Jobs. He always wore a suit and tie. He was always more calmer, more collective than Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was in your face. Well, remember what Steve Jobs was like when he was on stage. Bill Gates is a lot quieter. Bill Gates is a lot more, sit back, let everyone else have fun. I'll just sit back. Bill Gates is a nerd. Nerds? Gates is the nerd. Jobs was the geek. But Gates, like Jobs, is able to look 2, 3, 4 steps into the future. Very, 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 very intellectual mind when it comes to Bill Gates. And if you look at some of the old interviews, there was an interview done where Steve Jobs and Bill Gates was sat on stage, both together, at the same time, being interviewed. And the interview lasted for about, look it up on YouTube, I can't remember the name of it, but it happened because obviously Steve Jobs died years ago, but it happened years ago when Steve Jobs was, you could tell he was ill, but he was nowhere near as ill as he got when he eventually died. But this was like about 3 or 4 years before Steve Jobs died, and Jobs and Bill Gates was on stage. Go and watch that interview because it reveals a lot, an awful lot, about the way Bill Gates thinks. He thought a lot like Steve Jobs, but he was a lot quieter, a lot reserved. And again, he's able to look 2, 3, 4 steps into the future and prepare and plan for it. Why, all of a sudden, has Bill Gates decided to ditch climate change? And he's not the only one to ditch climate change. Little Greta Thunberg, little Greta, give little Greta a pat on her head. She decided to ditch climate change about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Now it's all free Palestine for Greta Thunberg. Even though little Greta, pat her head, even though little Greta was up on the United Nations stage giving it, how dare you, to all the old United Nations and country leaders in front of her because they weren't doing enough to avoid the climate disaster, as Greta Thunberg called it. All of a sudden, Greta Thunberg's not mentioning a thing about climate change. She's wandered off to go and free Palestine now. And now, Bill Gates is doing the same. And it's not just those two. There is a number of climate change scientists who have all of a sudden become very, very quiet when it comes to the United Nations saying yesterday that the world has not managed to hold on to the climate change idea of reducing warming below 1.5 Celsius. They're all quiet. They're all quiet. Why? Why the sudden change? Why the sudden change and why the sudden pivot of Bill Gates going away from climate change and now concentrating on, as he put it in his own words, where are we here? In his own words, biggest problem is poverty and disease. Here we go. biggest problem are poverty and disease, just as they have been. Understanding this will let us focus our limited resources on interventions that will have the greatest impact for the most vulnerable people. So now he wants to shift focus, as it said at the top of the Guardian article, to improving lives. Improving lives. Forget the thing about climate change killing us all. Ignore that. That's not going to happen anymore. Now Bill Gates wants to improve lives. And here's the thing. When it comes to people like Bill Gates, multi-billionaires like Bill Gates, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization, along with other multi-billionaires that are going to follow Bill Gates down this road, they're going to start pivoting as well. Why? Why? Well, let's look at the history of climate change. Ask your grandparents if they're around 70, 80 years old, because they'll remember this. Maybe even your parents, if they're still alive at, 60, 70 years old. They'll remember this as well. If they grew up during the late 1960s and all the way through the 1970s, ask them what climate change scientists were saying back in the mid-1970s. Now remember here, the 1970s was not really all that far away in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the shifting climate of planet Earth. 1970s, even into the very early 1980s, what were the climate scientists, along with the United Nations, saying all the way up to around about 1981, 1982? Go and ask your parents. Go and ask them, or your grandparents, and they will say the next great ice age. Go and ask them. Climate scientists from 1955 all the way up to the very early 1980s. So we're talking 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and the first couple of years of the 1980s, the better part of 3.5 decades. Climate scientists were all in agreement that the world was facing the next ice age. There is even a documentary, you can find it on YouTube, it's still up. There's even a documentary narrated by Leonard Nimoy, Spock from Star Trek, called The Next Big Freeze. I think it was called The Next Big Freeze. Leonard Nimoy narrated it, and Leonard Nimoy was on film talking about it. The Next Big Freeze. Because climate scientists were saying, they were all in agreement that by the time the 2000s rolled in, the next big ice age would start. And all of a sudden, they stopped. Round about 1982, 1983, the big freeze. All the scientists that were backing the big freeze theory from the mid-50s all the way up to the early 80s, they suddenly stopped talking about it. Then it was all about the ozone. Remember all that? The ozone? It was like a pivot. They threw something out there to make everyone forget about the big freeze theory. 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985. It was all about the ozone hole. We need to get rid of chlorofluorocarbons. We need to stop the hole at the top of the ozone layer from widening and becoming bigger and frying us all with cosmic rays. And then once a half a decade of ozone worry and scare stopped, global warming. Hold on a minute, weren't you lot saying about half a decade ago that it was going to be global cooling and we all be living like Eskimos? Sorry, not Eskimos, Inuits. Got to be politically correct here. We'd all be living like Inuits in the Arctic? Oh no, it's global warming now. The earth is going to boil, the oceans will boil, and we'll all be dead. Pivot. 180 degree, literally a 180 degree pivot from global cooling to global warming. That was 1980. They were all saying it from 1980, 1990, the zeros, the tens. Now we're in the 20s, round about 4 decades later. 4 decades later, and there is literally zero sign of anything the climate scarers were saying. Al Gore, was saying back in the late 1990s that by the time the 2020s rolled around, global sea levels would have risen 200 feet. They haven't. They haven't. The United Nations saying at the early part of the 2000s that if climate change and global warming was not dealt with sooner rather than later, by the time the mid-2020s came around, more than half the population would be starving to death. We're in the mid-2020s, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Climate scientists are now facing the exact same problem that climate scientists in the early 80s and late 1970s faced. Because they were all saying, by this time, this is going to happen and we'll all die. That didn't happen. Okay, by this time, this is going to happen and half the population's going to be dead. Didn't happen. Move on. Oh, well, okay, now it's going to be this time where everyone's got it's not going to happen. Prediction after prediction after prediction after prediction after prediction with the global cooling theory didn't appear, didn't happen, and the same thing is now happening with all the predictions that were made in the mid to late 1990s that by the mid to late 2020s we're all going to die. Global sea levels would have risen 200 feet. The Earth's temperature would be 20 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the 1990s. Every single prediction, every single date where we're all supposed to die, every single scare story where we're all supposed to drop down dead, hasn't happened. Hasn't happened. The climate change scientists today are now facing the same problem the climate scientists were facing at the early part of the 1980s. 3 decades worth of scare stories led to nothing. Fast forward to now. 4 decades worth of scare stories led to absolutely nothing. So, sorry, slight jump cut there. I noticed that I'm using Streamlabs desktop to record this, and I was noticing the recording stream was flickering slightly. It does it now and again. I really need to uninstall Streamlabs desktop and install a fresh copy, but lazy. So, where does this leave us? Remember that I said that Bill Gates, like Steve Jobs, and for that matter like Elon Musk, can look 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. Let's have a look at a completely unrelated news article that also broke a couple of days ago. Let's bring up BBC News and bring this in. Amazon confirms 14,000 job losses in corporate division. Amazon has confirmed it plans to cut thousands of jobs, saying it needs to be organised more cleanly to seize the opportunity provided by artificial intelligence. The tech giant said on Tuesday it would reduce its global corporate workforce by approximately 14,000 roles. Earlier reporting has suggested it was planning to lay off as many as 30,000 workers. Beth Galetti, a senior vice president at Amazon, wrote in a note to staff that the move would make the company even stronger by shifting focus to ensure we're investing our biggest bets and what matters most to our customers' current and future needs. Now, it looks like a completely unrelated news article. Nothing about climate change in there. Nothing about Bill Gates in there. But if you look at what all the major companies are now doing, all of the major companies, the tech companies that is, Nvidia, AMD, Intel to a lesser extent, because let's face it, Intel are screwed right now thanks to what AMD's been doing. Amazon, Google, Facebook to a certain extent, Microsoft to a certain extent. They're pushing the whole AI thing. Some people in the tech industry, including some of the people behind ChatGPT, have forecasted that within the next 4 years, this will bring us up to 2029, not even into the next decade. 2029. Some of them reckon that within the next 4 years, more than 100 million jobs in the United States. This is not worldwide, folks. This is just the United States. Around about 100 million jobs will be at risk of being essentially made pointless by artificial intelligence and robotics. Now, that's not to say that all 100 million people in the United States will suddenly lose their job, but their jobs will be at risk. At risk. You are going to have a flood if this technology manages to get to the stage where robotics are actually a thing, and robotics can actually take the place of your general Joe Schmo factory worker, or for that matter, burger flippers in McDonald's, or burger flippers in Burger King. Oh, wait a minute, that's right. There's a robot called Flippy who can already do it. You're going to be looking at 20, maybe 30 million people made redundant in the United States alone, and that's conservative estimates by a whole load of technology needy, geeky, nerdy, geeky people that have been interviewed by the likes of Konstantin Kishin over at Trigonometry, I always have a problem saying that word, have been interviewed by the likes of Joe Rogan over at the Joe Rogan Experience. 20 to 30 million jobs gone. And Bill Gates is now saying, we need to think about uplifting humanity. We need to think about uplifting the poor. We need to think about uplifting those who don't have it as good as us. It may interest you to know that for the past year to year and a half, Bill Gates has been pushing the idea of universal basic income. Now you know where this is tying in. Again, Gates is able to look 2, 3, 4 steps into the future, and he knows where the AI revolution is headed. The AI revolution is going to be kind of similar to the Industrial Revolution that happened or started in Great Britain. Scotland had a lot to do with the Industrial Revolution, but what the Industrial Revolution done is, in the end, it kind of created more jobs, because the jobs were now easier to do. It also created more food because the agricultural revolution happened alongside it. Farmers were able to plough their fields quicker. Farmers were able to harvest their crops quicker. Industry was able to make the goods more faster. Henry Ford, for instance, thanked the Industrial Revolution of Great Britain when he started dishing out the Model T Ford on his new fangled factory line. Bill Gates knows where this is headed. Climate change was never the problem, people. I think it's kind of basically obvious now. Sea levels have not risen in the past, 200, 300 years? They've not risen. And while global mean temperature has bumped up about 1 degree Celsius, did you know that if you look at the main cycle, and again, you can look this up on the internet, folks, plug into ChatGPT or something and look it up. The main cycle of Earth's falling and rising temperatures, this is not the warmest the Earth has been. In fact, it's nowhere near the warmest the Earth has ever been. During the time of the dinosaurs, mean temperatures were 10 Celsius above what they are right now. During the time of the dinosaurs, cool temperatures were slightly warmer than the coldest temperature we've got right now in the north, and the Arctic and the Antarctic. Even going back as far as 200,000 years ago, the temperature was actually slightly warmer than it is now. But hold on a minute, Vic. There was no greenhouse gases being pumped out by those nasty fossil fuels 200,000 years ago. No, there wasn't. The Earth is part of a much greater galactic cycle. Look it up. You'll see the sine wave. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. We're nearing the top of one of those hot peaks right now. We're nearing the top of it. The big worry is what happens after that peak when global temperatures start to plunge. Now you'll see global cooling, and there's going to be nothing we can do to stop it. There is going to be another ice age within the next 500 years. We'll start to see the start of it when global temperatures start dipping down. It's a galactic cycle. It's always been a galactic cycle. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Nothing can change it. And I think Bill Gates finally realises it. So now he's looking at artificial intelligence and the damage that AI is going to do for regular blue and white collar workers. And the fact that Bill Gates has publicly done a 180, he's scared. Not for himself. He's a billionaire. He can ride it out. But he's scared about what's going to happen when 20 or 30 million people in the United States and 5 to 10 million people in the UK are suddenly made redundant over the course of the next half decade. What's going to happen? Are we going to be looking at riots? Because a welfare state cannot support that many people starting to sign on in the UK. Universal basic income. And I bet that's the next thing Bill Gates talks about. That's it from me, folks. Have a good one.